So good morning. I'm grateful to be able to present to all of you today. My name is Gilad. I am an information policy and privacy researcher and consultant. I founded the IoT Privacy Forum as a place to focus my work and the work of others to provide analysis and guidance and best practices to help companies and governments innovate responsibly with IoT and connected devices. And so today I'm here to share with you the findings of 18 months of research into IoT privacy. And of course, security and privacy are not the same thing, but they're related and overlap with one another. And I tried to shape this talk to address where privacy and security and identity overlap and to highlight areas that need more attention from security and privacy professionals. The research I'm presenting was funded by the Hewlett Foundation in the United States and was co-authored by me and Erin Keneally, who is a cybersecurity attorney for the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. And we held 2 workshops on each U.S. coast and conducted many one-on-one interviews. And all in all, we spoke with 40 experts, business people, lawyers, engineers, protocol developers, advocates, government officials, and scholars. And out of this work, we published 2 reports. The first is called Clearly Opaque, Privacy Risks of the Internet of Things. And UC Berkeley's Center for Long-Term Cybersecurity published a summary of that longer report entitled Privacy and the Internet of Things, Emerging Frameworks for Policy and Design. Both reports are free and are available at the web address, which is in the slides, which I will also be making available after the talk. So firstly, I'm going to give you the top-level findings about the privacy risks that consumer and enterprise IoT brings with it. So firstly, the IoT will expand the data collection practices of the online world to the offline world, and it portends a diminishment of private spaces. The IoT will make it easier to identify people in public and private spaces and will encroach upon emotional and bodily privacy. So the proximity of IoT devices to our bodies will allow third parties to begin to collect our emotional states over long periods of time. And given the likelihood of ubiquitous data collection throughout the human environment, the notion of privacy invasion may start to decompose, more so as people's expectations of being monitored increases. And so much of consumer IoT is predicated on inviting these devices into our lives. And so the ability to know who is observing us in our private spaces may diminish greatly. When IoT devices fade into the background or look like familiar things, we can be duped by them, lulled into revealing more information than we might otherwise. Connected devices are designed to be unobtrusive, and so people can forget that there are monitoring devices in their environment. Consumer IoT devices challenge and cross and destabilize boundaries, as well as people's ability to manage those boundaries. The home is in danger of becoming a glass house, transparent to the makers of IoT home products. And as more and more products are released with IoT-like features, there will be an erosion of choice for consumers, less of an ability to not have things in their environment monitor them. Market shifts towards smart features that are intentionally unobtrusive lead to less understanding of data collection and less ability to decline those features. The IoT makes getting meaningful consent more difficult and is in tension with the principle of transparency. And the IoT will have an impact on children and therefore give parents additional privacy management duties. Children today will become adults in a world where ubiquitous monitoring by an unknown number of parties will be business as usual. So, based on our research, here are the frameworks and strategies emerging to address some of these issues. They fall into 3 categories: notification, governance, and user control and management. And by notification, I mean how companies inform users about their data collection and use. I know everyone in this room has seen a privacy policy and that everyone has, at least once, clicked I agree without reading that policy. It's become widely accepted that this happens all the time. So researchers are exploring ways to make privacy notifications more relevant and more meaningful. They've found that timing has an impact on privacy notice effectiveness. And so we're seeing experimentation with new kinds of notices. Just-in-time, periodic, and layered. With just-in-time notices, these are pretty standard. Most of us have seen this before. The information is displayed when it's most relevant, at the time of engagement. But periodic notifications are reminders that privacy-sensitive data practices are ongoing, and so reminding people of that is a way for them to be more engaged with their privacy choices and give them an opportunity to change their minds. How many people in this room have seen this kind of notice? A fair bit. It's important to note that these have to be enabled at the OS level, and that this is a norm, not a requirement. So it emerged because the right people inside Apple and Google and app developers have been asking for it. And finally, a layered notice presents a high level of information that allows users to drill down into the specifics at different and more relevant times. Researchers are also exploring automation of privacy notification. There are attempts to teach apps to learn what people's privacy preferences are and to possibly automatically set those preferences. There are experiments to nudge users to encourage them to think about their privacy settings more. Periodic notifications are one form of a nudge. And it's early days for this, but there are experiments for IoT devices to advertise their presence to users when they enter a space. And so for all of this research, I would point you to privacyassistant.org, which is work coming out of Carnegie Mellon University. Next are our recommendations for changes to governance and policy. The first is greater use of the precautionary principle in IoT policy. Precautionary principle is something that's a bit more enshrined in the regulatory culture in Europe than it is in the United States. And so we find that from the perspective of the political orientation of IoT policy, that this type of approach is going to help have less things be broken right when they start. This is for the United States, creation of baseline omnibus privacy laws. Obviously, in Europe and the UK, the GDPR captures that, and prior to that, it was the Data Protection Directive. In the US, we're starting to hear some discussions about a potential omnibus privacy law, and so that is one thing to watch. Regulations restricting IoT data from certain uses. Use regulations are not often used in information policy, but it's definitely an area to be well explored. And again, for the United States, to expand the concept of personally identifiable information to include sensor data, which largely it does not. And for policymakers to have discussions about the collapse of the reasonable expectation of privacy standard. So we are also suggesting guidance from regulators on how companies can innovate with privacy policy language and presentation, as well as a regulatory requirement to test those privacy policies for user comprehension. If, in fact, you have users who are reading these policies, but they don't know what they say, or they're just incredibly vague, you're not getting anything done. We would like to see more technologists embedded with policymakers. The Tech Congress program in the United States is a great example of that. And then exploration of trusted IoT labels and certification schemes. Now, finally, our recommendations for user control and management, which break down into three categories: pre-collection, post-collection, and identity management, which cuts across both pre- and post-collection. In pre-collection, we have data minimization, which means only these are suggestions for developers and for manufacturers and service providers. Only collect data for the current needed uses. Don't collect data for future as yet unknown uses. Now, we recognize in making this recommendation that that does tend to come into tension with a lot of different business goals. But as a principle in privacy, data minimization is one that's been supported for the last 40 years of thinking in data protection. And so it bears still continuing to think about. Building in do not collect switches, such as mute buttons or software toggles. Building in wake words like Hey Siri or OK Google, or manual activation for data such as with a button, versus the truly always-on devices where monitoring happens all the time, or where one doesn't know when monitoring starts or stops. And to perform privacy impact assessments to holistically understand what your company is collecting and what would happen if there was a breach. The GDPR now requires this in many cases. PIAs are particularly helpful if you suspect that your industrial or enterprise IoT implementations are collecting more than just employee data. In the post-collection category, we have make it easy for people to delete their data. Again, this is something that the GDPR is now requiring. And the same, to make it easy to withdraw consent. Make it easy for data to disappear after a set period of time, what one person has called a biodegradability option. In other words, make it easy for someone to say, I want this subset of data, or all of my data, to disappear after 90 days. IoT data should not be published on social media or indexed by search engines by default. Users have to have the ability to review and decide before that data is published. And so here we see the idea of opt-in versus opt-out. And again, these are norms that by discussing them, by bringing them out, by discussing them inside organizations and with regulators, we move in the direction of the good. And raw data should be exist only for the shortest time possible. And it's amazing that this needs to be said in 2018, but we have to remind device manufacturers and IoT service companies to encrypt everything to the maximum degree possible. However, many small, low-power IoT devices may not have the ability to run encryption, as many of you will know, and so there's active research on lightweight cryptography to address this, and in particular, I would point you to the work by NIST on this subject. And the third category in user control and management strategies is identity management. Now, the IDM research community and research and commercial work has yielded valuable language and concepts such as unlinkability, the intentional separation of data events and their sources, breaking the links that form between the different places that users go online and the different devices that they use, and unobservability, building systems that are blind to user activity. Both of these can be deployed in the design of IoT devices and their host systems. For example, unlinkability in an IoT context can be restated as my car, my Fitbit, my voice assistant, and therefore the manufacturers and intermediaries do not need to know which websites I visit or which other devices that I use. Unobservability is a design principle that can be applied to intermediaries and platforms, blinding them from user activity. Now, the identity dimensions of the IoT are just beginning to take shape, and there are two key considerations: machine identity and human identity. Machine identity concerns the ways that devices are authenticated and kept track of in an IoT management system. This encompasses, of course, security, machine trust, patching and updates, as well as the provenance of the data coming off of these devices, just to name a few. Human identity in the IoT context concerns questions which all have privacy implications. Who's the device owner? Are there additional users? Is there an option for unidentified guest users or pseudonymous use? Can users be given partial control rights? For example, can they change the thermostat but not turn it off? Who can access data stored on the device or the direct sensor feeds? And can device owners see other users' data? Can two users see one another's data or change each other's settings? And can a device be verifiably associated with a particular user? And how do users disconnect or disassociate themselves? And the disconnection use case is one where there is a great need to explore further to understand how users can separate themselves. The FTC puts out posts and warnings and stories and suggestions throughout the year, and they have actually gone so far as to say, do not plug your phone into rental cars, into the USB port, because some of these cars automatically are pulling contact data off of your phone when you do it, when you're trying to just charge your phone. And then, because the norms around this haven't really been built up yet, the ability for you to go into your rental car and actively delete any data that might have been pulled across is not necessarily easy. And so this issue of disconnection and disassociation is a new area because of the proliferation of these devices that needs much more activity and research and commercial development. So, the lens of identity management yields the following design strategies: unlinkability, building systems that can sever the links between users' activity and on different devices or applications; unobservability, to build or use intermediary systems that are blind to user activity, give people the option for pseudonymous or anonymous guest use, and design systems that reflect the sensitivity of being able to identify people. Also, use selective sharing as a design principle, meaning design for fine-grained control of data use and sharing. Make it easy to share with this person and not that person. And the best example I've heard for this that sort of highlights the deficit in the IoT world around this topic is Google Docs. If any of you, I'm sure many of you have used Google Docs, and so it has very basic controls. Yes, view, comment, edit, admin. Where are those levels of control in IoT devices today? Are they common? Do you see them in the consumer and enterprise devices that are out there? And if not, then that is an area that is, again, needs much more attention to be able to encourage the privacy-positive idea of selective sharing. Obviously, a lot of privacy discussions center around confidentiality and secrecy, sensitivity, and preventing disclosure. But the other side of this, if you imagine that IoT devices are in part designed to share, and again, a great example I heard about this is smart socks. They exist. The whole point of smart socks is to be able to share the data coming off of it. Yes, it's of course also for you to look how many steps you're taking and how you're running and whatnot, but at some point, it's going to occur to you that, oh, I'd like to share this with a running partner or with a doctor or with a coach. And so in which case, the privacy-positive perspective of selective sharing is a critical way forward in thinking about privacy in the IoT ecosystem. Create dashboards for users to see, understand, and control data that's been collected about them. And again, design easy ways to separate different people's uses of devices from one another. Thinking about identity management in the context of IoT shines a spotlight on essential missing elements of the IoT ecosystem. And so I'm going to close my talk with this challenge question. You're renting out your place on Airbnb. You have 5 smart light bulbs by 3 different manufacturers. You have a smart thermostat, a smart lock on your front door, a smart bathroom scale, a connected coffee maker, and a smart TV. And you want to give access and some control rights to your Airbnb renters. They can change the house temperature but not turn off the heat. They can use the smart bathroom scale but not see the residents' weights, and the smart lock should let them in and out up until 5 p.m. the day that they're supposed to leave. How do you do this? Today, this is not easy at all. So far we have some candidate technologies and frameworks that envision to make this happen, and I would point you to UMA, the User Managed Access Protocol, as one example. But doing something like this is far from business as usual. And yet it's clear that if smart homes and smart devices mean anything, we'll need to be able to do this and do it well. So I put to you that this example, this intersection of security and privacy and identity and interoperability is one of the next great challenges for the IoT ecosystem. So, thank you.